But as you're looking forward into the next 5 to 10 years, where we've got demographic challenges, funding challenges, technological challenges, regulatory challenges, I mean, all kinds of challenges. Anywhere you look, there's a challenge. Is the glass half full, half empty, filled with arsenic? As you're looking at the future, 5 years, say 5 years from now, how is Dennis Dahlen going to be feeling about healthcare then relative to today?
And so I can't adopt any sort of mindset other than being optimistic about this, because I want it to be better. I want us to be a solve-based industry, and Mayo Clinic, as we are a solve-based entity in the healthcare industry. And so I'm looking forward to the advent of more technology enablement to make things better, more connected, more perfect, or closer to perfect in diagnostics and treatment options, to extend human effort, force extenders through technology. All of that's highly attractive to me as a future consumer, and probably a growing consumer as I age, of healthcare.
Welcome to Follow the Money, where we engage healthcare leaders about where smart companies are investing today to prepare for tomorrow. I'm your host, Dave Johnson, the CEO of Foresight Health and a strategic advisor to Innovacer, our show's sponsor. Our guest today is Dennis Dahlen, the Chief Financial Officer of the Mayo Clinic. Welcome to Follow the Money, Dennis. Did you bring your wallet?
Was that a requirement, David? No, I did not bring my wallet, or at least it's under careful guidance or careful watch. But
it's probably digital, given your level of sophistication. So it's there, but virtual. Anyway, Dennis, thank you so much for agreeing to participate. What we're going to dig into, as our title suggests, is how the Mayo Clinic is living in both worlds, the current fee-for-service world that we're all very familiar with, and Mayo is not only a national but a global leader, and the disruptive new world that's coming faster than we can imagine, that will have more balance between healthcare prevention and healthcare provision. We'll have just incredible technologies guiding this, and hopefully will lead to better health outcomes at lower cost with better customer experience. So let's just start at 50,000 feet. That old adage, in healthcare, you got 1 foot in the volume canoe and 1 foot in the value canoe. Right. I think we need to update that. It's 1 foot in the current structure and 1 foot in the future structure. And it's not only that we're getting further from the dock, the one canoe's got a leak in it. So at some point we got to get into the future. So how are you thinking about that? And how is Mayo Clinic investing and, doing everything you can to be as efficient in the current way of doing things while getting ready for the new world that's coming?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for framing it so expertly, David. And again, framing kind of the way we look at the world here at Mayo Clinic, is really, sort of parallel universes. Everybody's got to feed themselves today to sort of get to the long term, right? There's no long term without the short term. And so just like every other healthcare provider system, we're every year's plan, every quarter's plan has got some performance improvement activities, right? And so some of the work that we're doing, in automation and AI is really feeding that, really just to move, to create efficiencies or greater effectiveness or lower cycle times or whatever it is, that adds to performance and makes it more convenient for patients. So we're doing all of that. That's more of the, sort of small ball. You got to hit a few singles to stay in the game. And then, really there's a few, we also populate the lineup with a few sluggers. And so we're taking big swings around foundation models, sovereign AI, agentic, super intelligence models that, the more I learn about those models, it's a two sides, double-edged sword, because the promise they hold is immense at advancing medicine beyond the constraints of human effort and human intellect. But it's also, a bit scary in terms of, if you're Mayo Clinic and sort of at the pinnacle of the overall healthcare pieces, does this make, the magic that has been resident inside the walls of Mayo Clinic and other, premier providers make it more, more common and more. So do we lose our advantage? And so you and I have spoken many, many times about the difficulty of incumbents sort of changing a marketplace or disrupting themselves. That's exactly kind of where we're at, where we're thinking.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember this, but I actually had the greatest typo ever when I was writing my first book, Market versus Medicine. I'd used the word incumbent, and whoever was doing the editing had put a D in for the C, so it became indumbent. And so so I've used that term indumbent behavior to describe what you were just mentioning, which is incumbents, often too comfortable just continuing to do what they've always done. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and so what we're channeling our energies into is, if the new game is on a super intelligence, battlefield, we just got to be better at it than everybody else. Maybe, and then brings into consideration first mover advantage versus second mover and perfecting something rather than pioneering something. All of those. We still, anyway, so I don't want to leave your listeners, David, with the sense that we're averse to this. We're actually leaning in very significant ways, investing in this in very significant ways.
Oh, no, I know you are. But I mean, just to give you a hint of what's coming. So I was on stage last week and I had this recollection of Tom Friedman discussing human history in 3 phases, basically ice, water, and vapor. And so I went on AI, I think it was ChatGPT, and said, give me please elaborate on Tom Friedman's history of the world in terms of ice, water, and vapor. And I got back in seconds a very concise outline where he basically says the world is divided into 3 stages. So everything up until the printing press was what he called the age of tools. And basically we were frozen in ice and the molecules couldn't move very fast. And, weather started warming up and we got close to 32 degrees. And by the time the printing press came out, we were moving into liquid. And that period continued all the way up through the millennia, to the late 2010s, including the computer age. And that he called the age of information, and the age of globalism. And now he said the water temperature is 211.9 degrees, and we're about to enter the world of vapor. So we're going from the information age now, and this is what triggered the thought, Dennis, because you said intelligence, to the age of intelligence. And just like when water turns to steam, vapor goes everywhere, intelligence will be everywhere, just like it was when I got my, complete synopsis of Tom Friedman's remarks based on a general thought. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you think this age of intelligence is going to look like, and then we can dig into the specifics of the Mayo platform and some of the incredible things your company's doing to get ready for this. But just let's first talk about, what does it mean to be in an age of intelligence?
Well, I think so. I think it's the Anthropic CEO that, in a missive that was distributed earlier this year, said something about, the tools that, are really almost in current use, create a future where, every data center is the equivalent of many large nations, number of geniuses. And so if we have access as a species to that much genius, what can it accomplish? I mean, if you've got, we had one Albert Einstein, but if we have 100,000,
and he had to sleep.
And he had to sleep.
He had to sleep. Yeah.
Right. And so, some of even the little windows we get onto how these interactive agents work, where they're arguing with each other about the best way to do things, and it's just sort of an amazing thing to watch. Amazing, and in some ways a little bit frightening, because it appears to all of us like human behavior, and that's the sort of frightening part. But it does, it advanced the acceleration here in learning, and particularly in healthcare. Absolutely expert diagnostics, absolutely expert diagnosis, absolutely expert application of the best therapies and medications and whatever else to the specific circumstances there. We're then, is now the main constraint is, the amount of human effort that's available to do all this stuff, and the amount of time it takes to do this stuff. Maybe the new constraint will become, how much data can you input into these models to create absolutely expert and perfect diagnosis and treatment options, and maybe that's. And then it's, do we subject everybody to genomics providing genetic information and all of those sorts of things to start perfecting those models?
Yeah. Wow. Well, you just given me a lot to think about there. There's this Star Trek movie. I don't know if you remember it. I think it was called Voyage, but anyway, they come back to the 1970s because there's a sound in space that they tie to the humpback whales, and it's going to destroy the world. So they have to go, save the humpback whales. And anyway, during this kind of effort, Chekhov, one of the main characters, falls off a wall and cracks his head open and gets carried into a 1970s era emergency room. And they're about to drill holes in his head to relieve the pressure. And Dr. McCoy Bones comes in and says, "What is this, the Middle Ages, you barbarians? You're going to," on, and then takes out the tricorder, scans it a few times, right. And then Chekhov's fine. And I don't think that's quite as far-fetched today as it was in the 70s, given our ability to just consume all of this information. What healthcare's done a terrible job of up to this point is having unified data that could, populate an intelligence platform where you can run algorithms and gain insights, and then ultimately engage end users, the application. That's the stack, right? Unified data, intelligence platform, applications. But I know Mayo is working to solve that problem. So maybe talk a little bit, maybe it's a good time to talk about the platform and how in the not too distant future, Mayo doctors will have a tricorder that will just cure everybody on site.
Yeah, tricorder is maybe a little further off, but I got to your point, it seems more credible as a future than it did, even a year or two ago. I completely agree with that. So since you prompted me, if the future of super intelligence and that utility or that ability to utilize those capabilities manifests itself, then it probably is the inputs that become the new constraint. And platform is really designed before the advent of agents or agentic AI or superintelligence to create democratize data and make it available to researchers and innovators and whatever else to start perfecting things. And so it could become and certainly it's our goal to make it a very democratized, available to almost everybody in the world data source to help perfect those models, and certainly is available for solution developers and whatever else trying to hit a single, trying to get their business off the ground and commercialize it and create a win. In a larger scheme, the tremendous interest around the globe in that platform, both the data richness of that platform as well as, sort of the approach of it's a platform play. Everybody gets to, play in this sandbox and utilize it to best effect. By nations across the globe, very interested in using it, to set up their sovereign, sovereign foundation models. And so all of that's great news. And if you start setting those up, there's a network effect of those, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So that's the platform play. That's, that could feed or relieve that constraint of data coming into these superintelligence models, if you will. At the same time, we're all learning. I'd say at the very near the leading edge of what's going on, trying to create curated large language models that create, so you reduce the propensity of these models to go off the rails and do the weird stuff. And so try to create curated large language models that actually get to the right result faster, and are efficient at doing so. So creating that infrastructure, and as you and I again have talked, the healthcare is really nascent in this, even though all of the billions that were spent on electronic health records and whatever else, the resultant tools and data platforms there are really let's just say poorly designed for the work that's ahead of us to make that work.
Yeah, it's a conundrum in a way. I think arguably healthcare is behind almost every other industry in how it's used technology. But the implications of getting technology wrong are also more profound in healthcare than they are in. I was with Anil Jain, Innovator's chief innovation officer last year. You might remember him. He's the one that created Exploris at the Cleveland Clinic that IBM bought and turned into Watson. So he was talking about a study that just came out of Stanford where they gave a middle-aged or all the data on a middle-aged healthcare data on a middle-aged patient to every one of the large language models. So Claude, ChatGPT, Gronk, and so on. And then asked the LLM to interpret an MRI. And they all came back with their interpretations. Well, it turned out there wasn't an MRI in the data set deliberately. And basically the machines want to please, so they all came up with an interpretation of the MRI about what it should look like. So this is the part we don't know, right? How you referenced it earlier about how the machines are starting to communicate among themselves and how they operate. And so I think we have to be very careful. But you also talked about the progression of where the limitations might be in terms. We've got human limitations on delivery now, just given demographics and demand and the way we do things. And we're now moving into an area where maybe the limiting factor is going to be data and so on. So how do you think about the stages of automation? I mean, when we went to fully automated cars, there were 5 stages. There was visibility of data, then advice, low automation, high automation, and then full automation. As you're sort of thinking about this inside of Mayo, and you were talking about singles, like you shouldn't have to have a person ask if there needs to be a prior authorization, right? That's a yes or no question. That's something a machine ought to be able to do. We've got systems in Utah that are now filling prescriptions without human intervention and checkpoints. So, and I don't know how much time you spent thinking about this, but I have a feeling you're going to be spending a lot more time thinking about it going forward. Is what gets automated when, and what are the safeguards, and how over time do we just eliminate the drudgery of a lot of the tasks that happen within healthcare that we can automate with near 100% confidence, so we don't get the hallucinations and the the potential for just a grievous error created by machine logic we don't understand.
Yeah, no, really a terrific point. Yeah. So the way we're thinking about this is really kind of a portfolio approach. Is you got to have your
Hmm.
many lines in the water, because there's absolute opportunity in the near term from relatively simple stuff, relatively not simple by in its own right, but relatively
Right.
simple stuff. Things that we've, automating. We get at Mayo Clinic, we get lots of patients from elsewhere. Patients travel thousands of miles to get here. There's always a medical record, a base of data that accompanies it, but it's incredibly labor intensive for a Mayo clinician to intake,
Right. Right.
make heads or tails out of it. So we're taking great steps in automating that. That's agentic AI trying to do it's an enabler. It makes us much more efficient and much more effective and reduces cycle time. So that's all good stuff. Same goes for things like internal to Mayo Clinic tumor boards. I didn't know this up until about a couple of months ago, but on a weekly basis, we have something like 150 tumor boards. And each one of those meetings assembles a massive amount of data across many spectrums and many treatment categories on each individual patient, so that a group of physicians
Wow.
make the right decision for that patient. And of course, that's high intensity, has to be very nearly perfect work. And so assembling that, so we've created automation to do that, reducing, I think, the number of staff hours from dozens to single digits, something like that. Obviously,
Oh my God. That's
like
incredible.
what?
That's
Yeah,
incredible. Yeah.
right. Those are the singles that get us to the long game, right? But it also shows.
Yeah.
So it's a proof point that it shows the promise of all of these tools. These are, relatively, well, again, relatively simple kinds of stuff. When you start
Yeah.
thinking, but the end game here is super intelligence models that can, actually, go full automation. That's maybe a little too far for us to think about right now, but certainly an enabling construct. We're
Yeah.
all in on that, because we do believe, and thankfully, you and I have had our
Yeah.
interactions with the healthcare system, and
Yeah.
at the point of vulnerability, or when you're actually a patient that's doing something in the middle of something dire, or maybe not even dire, that human contact is important, right. So there's that whole nature of it. The care is still person to person, even if it's diagnosed, and treatment options are specified automatically or autonomously. So we're doing all of those sorts of things. I think there's great, if we can create, you and I both hear these stories all the time about discombobulated or disconnected care, right?
Yeah.
I just one I heard just last week was somebody who had a bladder cancer, and in a place where there wasn't a connected care. So she had a urologist and a medical oncologist and a radiation oncologist from 3 separate groups, and there's no connectivity. So I think that's another area where these new models could create connectivity, where the provider environment doesn't create it itself.
My God, that almost sounds like an old joke. A radiologist, an oncologist, and an internist are out on a boat, and what happens? Well, so there are risks. Do you have any great stories, like your tumor board story, or examples where the AI and the platform has done something or discovered something that wasn't previously known, and made a real difference in somebody's life?
Yeah. So, except for the little last part, I don't know about making a difference in individual's life, but
Yeah.
one of the ahas moments is we just discovered this over the last several months. Is in a chair of neurosurgery in Rochester, came from outside Mayo Clinic, academic background, strong researcher, really terrific individual. Started thinking about glioblastoma, one of the deadliest cancers around.
Right.
Highest
Brain,
mortality rate.
yeah, brain tumors, right? Yeah.
And so started using, and first entree, new to Mayo. Oh, platform, data, interesting. In the space of a week, found a strong correlation between high control of glucose during post-surgical treatment for glioblastoma, and an equally strong correlation between increase in survivability for the application of anti-seizure medicine. So those two things applied to glioblastoma patients found, I think the number was about a 50% increase. No, it was doubling of life expectancy in 5 years, from like below 20 to close to 50%.
Wow.
Huge, right? Huge. So so that's discovery. It's
and
got
who knew,
all the
right?
clinical trials and all the testing to make sure it's absolutely true, and it's not just correlation; it's cause and effect. But pretty strong indications from just the data set, and that took, a couple of weeks. So wow. pretty cool if that's in fact the case. It's still not a cure for glioblastoma, but it's certainly an improvement in the therapies.
Well, Sid Mukherjee, who wrote the book The Emperor of All Maladies about the history of cancer, had a piece out not too long ago that really fascinated me. And it's striking that that book, The Emperor of All Maladies, which I think won the Pulitzer Prize, it really wasn't until 25 or so years ago that we began to understand cancer at a molecular level. So pretty much everything we knew about cancer up until that point was just raw trial and error. What do you cut? What do you radiate? What do you drug? But now we're obviously getting down at the molecular level. He said he thought the next great breakthroughs in cancer would involve nutrition, of all things. So you basically, tumors need to feed themselves. Glucose is what most tumors use to grow. And the fact that you were able to correlate that with anti-seizure medicine, I don't know what the connection is there, but just having the data to be able to ask the question and then retrospectively go back and look at the what's happened in the past to get some idea about what will work. I mean, that's just incredible, right? I mean, just incredible.
It's sort of reversing the polarity. And I've never been a researcher. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a humble finance person. But generally discovery goes from a hypothesis of something.
Right.
This is actually, at least from my vantage point, is sort of swimming in the opposite direction. You're going from an observed effect and then trying to go backwards the other way. Like, why would that be the case? And try to understand the detail. Maybe it's at the molecular level, why that works.
So we're painting a pretty incredible vision of what the future of healthcare could be. What's going to get in our way from getting there? What are the industry obstacles? Some of which I'm sure you confront at Mayo, but are probably attacking them more aggressively than almost any other institution. But what's going to hold us back from getting to a point where the intelligence platforms and the data and the clinicians all working together in this really intricate dance of human-machine collaboration to create better outcome? What's going to stop us from getting there, or get in our way, if not stop us?
Well, certainly not an exhaustive list, but things that are on top of my mind are in any sort of ecosystem, and healthcare is a multi-trillion dollar industry, right? We know that, just in the United States. And so lots of incumbents, and frankly, lots of incumbents in the administrivia side of the ecosystem that, are enables, they're conduits, whatever, to sort of help the business side, the claims side, the whatever side, the supply procurement side of healthcare work. And so, each one of them has got a revenue and expense and an income and a P&L and probably some shareholders and that are going to have to be fed or not. And so obviously I fully expect that there will be sort of resistance or maybe repositioning of all of that as we go down this. And I'm not suggesting every part of the ecosystem changes, but, you could certainly paint a future where that is true. So I think that's one. The other is we talk about we use autonomous automobiles as a good case in point. Is right. They had I think Alphabet and the Waymo folks, I think their engineering target was, one failure out of a million or so. I was like, so it had to be almost nothing. And we tell ourselves in healthcare, because not every failure by a Waymo is going to result in a fatality. You could just end up circling something or park in the wrong spot. The risk for healthcare is even higher than that. So I do think what could get in the way is maybe some early applications that maybe are less than perfect and result in some harm or loss, and that could throw up regulatory barriers and maybe legislative hurdles in doing this. And so I do worry about that a little bit. So those are just
that's really I want to dig in on that last point just a little bit, because you're right. I mean, if a Waymo car gets in an accident, people go crazy, right? I figure there was a Waymo car ran over a cat, and people went crazy about that. And yet, I don't know how many cats get run over every day, and across the world. Yeah, probably thousands. And one of the things I worry about is we're not perfect. We're far from perfect in medicine. All kinds of medical error. So how the standard can't be zero medical error for autonomous systems, just like it's not zero medical error for autonomous cars. But how do we balance our desire to have the systems be as good as possible without just cutting the legs out from underneath progress, when we live in a world where there's all kinds of medical error, and on any kind of reasonable comparison basis, the machines would probably do, on balance, probably better. But anyway, any thoughts on that? That's a really tricky one.
It is a really tricky one. I think no perfect answer. Things that have been discussed and maybe debated are some sort of an independent body that's sort of off to the side, Switzerland, actually looking at things and saying, on balance, and maybe it's an underwriter's laboratory kind of thing about, this is safe. Now the details in that are immense, trying to figure out what that means across all of the spectrum of what we do in healthcare. But I think that's, rather than a provider organization or a certainly not a lobbying organization, that's not where it's going to own this.
Probably not an insurance company either.
It's sort of independent verification agency or utility would be helpful there. And I think really it's gotta follow the science, and maybe that's where you have this independent accrediting body of this is safe on balance, supported by maybe it's the NIH. I don't know. I think it's got to be factually and practically and visibly grounded in science, as opposed to something else. You mentioned insurance companies. This can't have any smell of economics or cost savings around it. It's got to be what's best for healthcare for each individual case and for collectively all of us.
Yeah. Well, we're getting near the end of our time. I'm going to give you one last question. Glasses half full, glasses half empty, kind of thing. So, our nation is spending over $5 trillion a year. By the way, I once tried to figure out how to explain how big a trillion was, because I think it's beyond human comprehension. And I sat there with my calculator and said, well, how many years would I need to live a trillion seconds? And the answer is 32,000 years. So if you can imagine wasting $1 trillion a year in healthcare, that's $1 a second for 32,000 years. So we got a lot of room for improvement on the administrivia piece of this, as you mentioned, as well as on the diagnosis and treatment side. But as you're looking forward into the next 5 to 10 years, where we've got demographic challenges, funding challenges, technological challenges, regulatory challenges. I mean, all kinds of challenges. Anywhere you look, there's a challenge. Is the glass half full, half empty, filled with arsenic? How as you're looking at the future, 5 years, say 5 years from now, how is Dennis Dahlen going to be feeling about healthcare then relative to today?
Well, so and David, you know this because we're about the same age. So I'm both still working in healthcare and leading in healthcare, but I'm also Medicare eligible. I'm over 65.
So am I.
Yeah. So
and it's still a paper card. Can you believe this? It's still a paper card.
Not amazing. So so at some point, over the next few years, I'm going to migrate away from the healthcare leadership and be solely a consumer of healthcare. And so I can't adopt any sort of mindset other than being optimistic about this, because I want it to be better. I want us to be a solve-based industry, and Mayo Clinic, as we are a solve-based entity in the healthcare industry. And so I'm looking forward to the advent of more technology enablement to make things better, more connected, more perfect, or closer to perfect in diagnostics and treatment options. To extend human effort, force extenders through technology. All of that's highly attractive to me as a future consumer, and probably a growing consumer as we age, as I age, of healthcare. I want perfect. I want now. I want easy. All of those sorts of things. It's access, affordability, and quality. That's what we all demand or desire from healthcare. I think the tool sets in front of us have never been better.
Well, that's a good place to land. I mean, you're almost taking a page from our founding fathers when they were writing the Constitution in order to form a more perfect union. Yeah. How do we form a more perfect healthcare system? Can't ever give up. It's going to constantly be changing, improving, and we have to be open to that. Thank you so much for being on Follow the Money, and I think our listeners, our watchers, hopefully have a sense about how Mayo Clinic is both thinking about and investing in the future. It's a future we all need to be a lot better. So thanks again for being part of this.
Dave, if you'll allow me, thank you for your service to the industry by being, a recovering investment banker, helping us raise money and expand and create capacity, to one that's watching the broader picture, the macro view. And I think you're tremendous value, and really appreciate the role you play in making us all better as well.
Oh, that's very kind. It's time, right?
Yes, of course.
All right. Thanks so much, Dennis.
All right. Thanks, David.